happening.
Oh yeah, that.
It was due like in April.
I don't know, bro.
Oh, that
Talk
is-
to me at tutorial. I'm literally starting to teach right now.
Okay.
Okay.
I sent an email, so.
All right. So, ready, set, go. All right. Classical music. So, the classical music time period is the time period that is after Baroque, and it has kind of a few different time spans. The first, wait, does anybody know what's up with Alex Ang-o? Gata, I need to see your face the entire time. I don't know what you don't understand about that. I need to see your face the whole time. Gata?
I am so sorry, Miss Burke. I'm late. I forgot studying for chemistry.
Uh-huh.
I'm dead.
Yeah.
I remember I was late. That was the dumbest thing.
All right. So the classical music time period had, now this is all stuff that's going to be on your test tomorrow, or is fair game for the test tomorrow. So please make sure that you're paying attention. Okay. The classical music time period had a span. Different historians are saying it happens during different times. Many of them say it's from 1750 to 1830. Some say from 1730 to 1820. Some say from 1730 to 1830. It's kind of all up in the air. It's the most important thing is for you to know that it happens after the Baroque period and before the Romantic period. And it's not more than 100-year of a period. So as I said from the very beginning, so you start with the medieval period, which was like over 1,000 years. So you go from medieval to Renaissance, which was about 250 years, to Baroque, which was like 150 years, to classical, which was about 80, if you go by most estimates, and it just gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So you can kind of see like the speed with which the evolution of music occurs. The thing that I put here was information about what is happening in the United States during this time period, because this is finally when our two time periods align, right? So before this, you didn't really have much happening in what we have the United States right now. You had the first colonizers in the 1600s, but I mean, it was like a couple of ships. It wasn't a big anything. But during this time is really when everything starts to take off. You can see American Revolution, the Constitution, George Washington was inaugurated, the Louisiana Purchase, War of 1812, and the Star Spangled Banner, etc. So all of this was happening during the time when classical music in Europe was really starting to flourish and become what it is that we know today. This is not something that was on anybody's radar in the 13 original colonies. Like, they were living in the wilderness, like, country. They were fighting many battles. They were poor. They were hardworking. They were trying to establish the country as we know it. And so because of that, they really could not care less about what was going on in Europe when it comes to music. All right. Main characteristics of classical music. So, if you remember from the Baroque period, a distinguishing factor between the Baroque period was that it was highly ornamental. It was very heavy. There was a lot of what's the word I'm thinking of? Ornamental, heavy instrumentation. Like, there was, if you remember, the artwork was very intense. There was lots of things going on. It was super like bombastic and obvious things that were happening. And the same was said for the music of that time. Classical music, it was no longer polyphony. So the polyphonic music was when you had a melody and then you had a counter melody, right? So it was a melody and a melody that played against and with each other, and they were happening at the same exact time. Homophonic music is when you have a melody and then you have basic chord structure underneath, okay? So, and that's the music that we know and what we play for today. In addition to that, the orchestra was really developed. It grew in size to become the orchestra we know today. Orchestras typically have between 40 to 60, up to 100, let's say 40 to 100 members is typical of an orchestra of today, and that developed during this time period. The harpsichord, which was highly used during the Baroque period, was phased out in the classical period and was taken over by the piano that we know today. So if you remember, the harpsichord was like a cross between an acoustic guitar and a piano. So it had a very like clink, 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 like sound to it. The piano was much more, what's the word? Like it had bigger, well, you've heard a piano, like it just sounds pretty. It's like big and velvety and it's very, very different than the harpsichord. And that was really brought about during this time period. Okay. So here you can see on my screen, I have the melody and then I have the bass. Now here you have melody. It's very obviously a melody. If I were to sing it roughly, it's da 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 da. Some of you may know what that is. It's a very famous piece. And on the bottom, it's da 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 da, the broken up arpeggiated chord. This is typical of classical music. So you had the melody on top, and then you had chordal structure on the bottom. Whether it was whole chords, arpeggiated chords, dum bum 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 chords, like broken chords, all those things. But as long as you had chordal structure on the bottom and melody on top, this was typical of classical music, or music from the classical time period, I should say. The theme was something that was always distinguishable in a piece in classical music. You could hum a theme. Right now, I could sing multiple themes, and you would know them. Dun 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 dun, or da 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 da.
I know that one. That's for Elise.
Yeah. Or you have I can't think of the other one right now. Anyway, but these themes, these melodies, became integral to the compositions that these composers wrote, and this was very characteristic of classical music as well. Okay. Now, as I said, with the Baroque period music was very heavy, highly ornamental, had a lot of sound going on. We, during the classical time period, had the introduction of style gallant, which was light and elegant. Now, again, this wasn't everything in the classical music period wasn't light and elegant, because obviously I just did Fifth Symphony. Dun 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 dun. Like, obviously that's not light, right? However, in contrast to the Baroque period, that was not normal of the time period. Okay. Another huge characteristic of the classical period was this is actually where composers started to tell their performers what they wanted in their music. So during the Baroque period, composers would write music. They would have the music written out, and then they would leave things like articulation and dynamics and style to the performer to then internalize and incorporate and make it their own, like, improvisation. During the classical music period, these composers said, no, I want it to be piano, then I want it to be fortissimo, then it meant mezzo forte, staccato, legato, crescendo, decrescendo. Like, I want it to be this way. The music that I hear in my head is what I want to hear when you perform, etc. And this was a huge undertaking that absolutely made what we have today what it is. So there's that. Okay. The next thing you have is the classical period. The keyboard, the piano became much bigger, and you could have much louder sounds coming from it just from the development of this period. You had opera comique. Opera comique, or comic opera, is the use of, if you remember if you have watched my video from last class, which if you haven't, you need to do that because your test is tomorrow. I talked about how opera during the Baroque period, they really wanted to make it like drama. So they wanted to take out comedy, like they wanted to take out comic, and they wanted to take out tragedy. They just wanted opera to be drama, like Greek drama. During the Renaissance, during the classical period, they really started to develop opera comique, and the kind of the way that this opera developed was you would have things happen that would never happen before. During this time period also, opera houses became very, very, very huge and used for popular music. And not only were they used for operas, but they were also used for very many different other things we'll talk about in 2 seconds. Okay. In addition to the opera comique, you have sonata. A sonata, okay, is a form of music. Okay, I haven't taught you guys forms at all, but you should know about it. So like one of them was a round. So a round is if you were to do like row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. And then the next person starts singing, row, row, row your boat, while the person continues, merrily, 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 life is but a dream, row, 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 and it just...
We did like scales, remember? Where we like did a B, and then the other person did a B, and then we went up and down.
Yeah, so that's a round. The sonata form is A, B, A, okay? A, B, A. Sonata form A, B, A. An example of that, again, is going to be something that you know. So here we go. So you have A. Twinkle, twinkle, da 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 da. B. Da 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 da. A. Da 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 da. A. A. B in between. A and A are almost identical, if not identical. B in between. Sonata form. The sonata form was huge during this time period. It was the introduction to symphonies. If you listen to a symphony, the first movement almost exclusively during this time period was in sonata form. So you had a theme introduced, you had a variant that was different from the theme, and then you had the theme recapitulated. Very, very, very like huge, important sonata form. Another thing in instrumental music was you actually had the beginning of string trios and quartets. So trios would have been, a lot of times I said string, but I meant trios in general, would have been woodwinds, brass winds, trios, and quartets. This is where we had standardized quartets. You had violin, viola, cello, bass, double violin, cello, bass, and you would see these quartets would be hired by wealthy people to come to their balls or to come to their houses to entertain, and it became a very important part of high society. And because of that, the music that was developed for it there's a plethora of quartets from this time period. The symphony, like I said, was huge. It was developed. It became what it is today. It was performed by an orchestra.
It was made.
Yeah, there's another word I can, but it's just my brain. I haven't drank my coffee yet. Concerto, like the concerti of the Baroque period, was a solo instrument to show its virtuosity, accompanied by a smaller orchestra. And then you have lighter pieces like serenades and divertimentos, which are just shorter 3 to 5 minute, light, fluffy, practice pieces for a lot of composers. Oh yeah, I did this last time too, I forgot. So the sonata form, very, very important, large scale works, etc. Okay, here we go. Now, the first Viennese school. The first Viennese school is not actually a school. Like, it's not the Bishop Verot High School. Like, it's not a school. It's a group of people that invented music as we know it, or changed music as we know it, I should say. Before this group of people came, you had Baroque period. The Baroque period was heavy, ornamental, and serious. The Romantic period is after the Classical period. It's dramatic, it's awe-inspiring, it's melodic. The Classical period is a bridge between the Baroque period and the Romantic period, and it uses both, and you can kind of see like the blend happening from Baroque to Romantic, and it kind of changes and modifies as it gets closer. So it's like the bridge between one very, very like domineering Baroque to very light, happy, fluffy. The word in and of itself, romantic, lets you know that that's the sound that it's creating. Go lay down, Peanut. Go lay down. So the Vienna School actually established and refined classical music, and it was composed of, I hate using that, but it was composed of 3 composers. The first being Haydn. He was the oldest of the 3. Mozart and Beethoven. If you talk to a random 5-year-old on the street and you were to say, hey, who's a music composer? Like, chances are they're gonna say Mozart or Beethoven, because Mozart and Beethoven are the 2 most famous composers that anybody is gonna know. And the reason is because they were so incredibly influential for us as we know it, as people in 2020.
Wasn't one of them deaf?
Beethoven became deaf, like mid-life. He became deaf, like almost completely. Very much so.
How did he make music then?
Touch. He's a genius.
You can touch the vibration, but like
heard everything, and he was like,
I mistaken that word.
He's
like, I was like,
you what?
I remember Mr. talking about it.
He's
remember like chords and stuff.
you keep interrupting each other.
Long story short, Beethoven was a genius, and you cannot, no matter what happens, you're gonna keep doing what you need to do. And he had the sounds in his head, he had the music in his head, so he just had to put it pen to paper. He was what you would call a mad genius. He just had so much like in his brain, and no thing like deafness would stop him from creating, because he was that powerful of a human.
I mistook that word for another way of saying it.
What word?
Of death, like actual death. I didn't know it was death.
Oh, death. Yes.
Yeah,
I was
he
like, wait,
did
what?
die eventually.
Thank you.
I think they're all dead by now.
They are
Is it
definitely
death
all
halfway?
dead.
I'm like,
Okay.
what?
Shh. Here we go. Ready? Schubert wrote a lot of choral works, but he is not really part of the first Viennese school. He's like that friend in your friend group who like you invite to some of the parties, but like not all the parties. If you know what I'm talking about, like, yeah, he's part of our group, but he's a little weird. Whatever. Okay, Haydn and Mozart were homies. They were chamber music partners together, and they would play music together in chamber ensembles. Chamber, by the way, is in a small room. So you had castles. You would invite people to your house, your castle, and you would have them in a room so that a chamber ensemble could play. just remember that. The Mozart and Haydn were chamber players together. Mozart was a teacher-like person to Beethoven, and they all were kind of in the same area. They were contemporaries. They would work together. They I don't know, lots of stuff. Okay. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. He was from 1756 to 1791. And Ludwig van Beethoven, he was from 1770 to 1825. So as you can see, Beethoven was very young when Mozart died. He was 14 years old, but he was able to learn from Mozart and then carry that on towards the end of the classical period. There were two very different composers. Mozart was composing, he started composing at 5 years old. Okay, so if you know anything, so my favorite thing to know about people is like when they started to really, people being like genius level, is when they really started to become their person that they ended up becoming. So like for Mozart, it was 5 years old. He started writing compositions at 5 years old, and not like putting like dots on paper. Like, I mean, he was writing full on compositions at 5 years old. So, and that's obviously important, because if you can do math in your head, you can see that he died at 35. Okay, and he was very prolific in his 35 years, but he still died at 35 years old. Okay, so it's kind of a little sad to think about how quickly his life happened. So he was happy, cheerful, not good with money. He was very neat. If you look at his compositions, his original compositions are very neat, as opposed to moody, poorly tempered Beethoven, who had like he would write and then crumple up and throw it on the floor and then write some more, and then it's still messed up, and it was all, he was like I said, he was a mad genius. He was just all over the place. He had so much going on in his brain. Mozart played for kings and queens. Beethoven was for the people. Morgan. He wrote up to by the time he was 30, he had already written 40 symphonies. By the time Beethoven was 30, he wrote one. Okay, so just to think about how prolific Mozart was as compared to Beethoven in the same time period. And to think about how much more music Mozart could have had if he hadn't died tragically, unexpectedly. He died as a pauper. He was buried in a pauper's grave, unmarked, with no one around. Like it's really sad. His dad, when he was younger, would go and travel him to all different places in Austria, like kings and courts and stuff, and make him play for them. And there's a lot of stuff that was there. And Beethoven's dad was like really mean and made him practice for hours and hours and hours and hours upon day. Yeah, so a little bit about that. Okay, really quickly, because I want to get to some music listening. So at this point, we have established what is the string family, the orchestral string family: violin, viola, cello, bass. All right, it is established at this time. It doesn't change after this. Violin, viola, cello, bass. If you talk about the instrumental string family, this is what it is. Sometimes harp. Woodwinds were finally able to become a part of the composition for people. Flute, oboe, bassoon, clarinet. There was finally music composed to include these instruments. Okay, one of the pieces I was going to play for you was Mozart's Clarinet Concerto, which I played my senior year from college. It's like 35 minutes long, and I really like it, but I chose a different piece for Mozart now. Okay, percussion, timpani came about during the classical time period, and Turkish instruments, so things like tambourine, triangle, bass drum, etc. That was during this time period. And you could see it was Turkish. Okay, so it wasn't like classical. They brought the instruments and the concepts from Turkey. Then you have, no longer do you have the harpsichord, but you have the clavichord and the piano. The brass instruments, you finally have French horn, you have the trumpet as we know it today, and you have the trombone as we know today. You also have the buchin. What is that, you ask?
What is that, Miss Berg?
It's a crazy trombone.
That's like whack.
Like, actually, what is that? Like, what is that?
Who did this?
That's awesome, right?
Oh, hold on.
Like a duck bill.
Does it look like a duck head?
Alex, if you're a boss fight, this is your second form.
I love it.
Yeah.
Anyway, and then so here are the composers that we're going to listen to. So I'm gonna go back over yonder.
That say Ludwig?
Ludwig. So, the first one we're going to listen to is Haydn. This is Symphony mit dem Paukenschlag.
Is he German?
Yes. We're German, Austrian, right? Vienna. Okay, so here we go. You probably have heard this piece before. Oh, it's frozen. There it is. All right, here we go. Oh, you can't hear it.
Miss Berg, get you to that.
So it's light, it's airy. You can hear the theme, the melody. Now, you've heard this bomb, right? That chord happening. That is because this piece, the Symphony Number 94, in G major, is actually is nicknamed Surprise Symphony. So like they would play it and it was all pretty, and then they went bam, and in their face because they were there's a whole history as to why he wrote it the way that was. Okay. One thing that I forgot, I kind of meant, but I really want you guys to understand, is that the composers of this time period did not nickname their music, okay? It was all of their pieces of music were titled as if it was going to be into a catalog. So it was like Symphony Number 9 in A flat major, Movement 1 Andante. Like it was descriptive. Anything that you know, Moonlight Sonata, Fur Elise, Surprise Symphony, those titles of pieces were never ever supposed to be the title of the pieces. Okay, just a little bit of information about that. Okay, Piano Concerto. This is Mozart. Here we go. So you can hear in this piece by Mozart, this is a piano concerto, so piano is the soloist, the orchestra was the backing, aka also, thing about that, concertos, you're always going to have the orchestra introduced for about a minute and a half before the soloist comes. And they're going to play the themes that you're going to hear, kind of like how we have an overture in musicals. It's that same exact concept. So they're going to play the themes that you're going to hear before the soloist actually comes. Okay, and the last one, so that was Mozart, really pretty, you know Mozart. This one is Beethoven's Symphony No. 9. Chances are you've probably heard this, especially if your parents listen to like NPR or PBS or anything like that. Here we go. Okay, now I can watch this stuff literally for hours, but we just don't have time. So I am going to ask that you guys